A lone man crossed the moors, a silent falcon on his arm and secrets in his grasp. In the shadowy world of medieval spies, the most effective agent was not a knight or an assassin, but a humble traveling falconer. This is the story of how he turned his mastery over birds of prey into a web of influence so powerful, he became the unseen ruler of the North's intelligence. By the end, you will understand the ingenious methods that allowed one man to sway wars and alliances from the background. How did a simple bird trainer gain access to the most guarded conversations in royal courts? What was the secret code hidden in the flight of his falcons? What does his story reveal about the hidden power of adapting your unique skills? His life was a rhythm of quiet footsteps and open skies, a solitary figure moving between the bustling castles of the nobility and the quiet, watchful villages. A master falconer's world was one of profound contrasts. On his arm perched a geofalcon or a peregrine, a living symbol of status and power that only the highest ranks of society could afford to own. Yet the man himself was often overlooked, his presence as natural and unremarkable as a piece of the landscape. This was the art of falconry, a discipline far beyond mere sport. It demanded a deep, intuitive knowledge of the wind and the wild, endless patience, and a bond with the bird so strong it felt like a single shared mind. A noble's prized falcon was a reflection of his own power, but it was the falconer who truly held the creature's trust, the only one who could call it back from the heavens. This respect granted him an extraordinary passport. He could cross from one rival lord's lands to another, from a war camp to a royal court, all under the simple, unquestioned guise of tending to the birds. While knights and diplomats were watched with suspicion, the falconer was invisible. He was a piece of the scenery, present during private walks in the garden, nearby during hushed conversations on the battlements, and welcome in camps where he would tend to the birds of high-ranking officers. In these unguarded moments, he heard everything. He noted the casual complaints of a garrison captain, the whispered anxieties of a courtier, the distant movement of supply carts. His trained eyes saw not just the flight of his hawk, but the layout of a fortress, the number of soldiers at a gate, the mood of a populace. His very commonness was his greatest weapon. Who would suspect the humble bird trainer of carrying secrets across enemy lines, his messages hidden not in a pouch, but in the routine patterns of his journey? This was the perfect cover, a life built on observation and trust, waiting for someone clever enough to use it for something more. The boy's world was the wind and the wild, his first school the open moors. Under his grandfather's watchful eye, he learned to handle a young kestrel, his small hands learning a gentleness that spoke of strength, not weakness. This was not a simple hobby. It was an ancient discipline, a conversation without words between human and bird. Every day was a lesson in patience, in reading the subtle shifts in the weather, in understanding the language of the landscape. He learned why a hawk might balk at a certain wind, or how the flight of other birds could signal a predator or a stranger moving through the valley. In a land of harsh winters and shifting loyalties, this awareness was not just skill, it was survival. His grandfather taught him to watch people with the same sharp eye he used for his birds, to notice the tension in a man's shoulders or the false ease in a traveler's smile. These were the unspoken rules of their world, where a wrong word to the wrong lord could mean ruin. The boy's apprenticeship forged something rare, a rustic wisdom paired with a natural talent for silence and observation. He was learning to see the threads that others missed, the hidden patterns in nature and in human nature alike. This quiet education in the North would become the bedrock of his future, the foundation for a life of secrets written not on parchment but carried on the wind. Among these falconers, silence was a sacred vow. They formed a scattered brotherhood, bound not by blood but by a shared understanding of discretion and absolute loyalty to their craft and their patrons. To betray a lord's trust was to betray the bird itself, an unthinkable act that would see a man cast out from this unique fraternity forever. This ingrained culture of confidentiality was the bedrock of his new, secret life. He moved through the world as a trusted servant, his movements and observations rarely questioned because his loyalty was assumed. A nobleman would speak freely in his presence, discussing troop movements or a rival's weaknesses, seeing only the man tending to the prized falcon on the glove. They never saw the spy memorizing every word. He learned to weave his intelligence into the very fabric of his work. A particular sequence of whistles, used to call a bird back from a hunt, could also signal that a certain forest path was clear of enemy scouts. The way he fastened a leather jest to a bird's leg might indicate the number of ships spotted in a harbor. Even the bird's behavior became a signal. If his falcon was restless and unhooded at dawn, it could mean a message was urgent. If it remained calm and hooded, it signaled all was well. The tools of his trade were transformed into instruments of covert communication. The leather hood that kept a bird calm could be left on or off to signal safe houses. The bells attached to its legs could be tuned to a specific pitch, their sound identifying a friendly agent in a crowded market. To any observer, it was just a man and his bird, a common sight. But to those who knew the code, it was a living, breathing messaging system, a sophisticated spycraft playing out in the open air, completely invisible to even the most vigilant guards. His greatest weapon was not a hidden dagger, but the assumption of his own insignificance. The market square roared with the chaos of 1,000 voices, a stark contrast to the quiet moors he called home. Amid the jostling crowd, a nobleman's prized falcon was in a wild panic, flapping against its jesses, its shrieks cutting through the din. While other handlers backed away, the falconer stepped forward. His movements were slow and deliberate, his voice a low, steady murmur. He did not grab or command. He simply offered a gloved fist, his presence a calm center in the storm. The great bird, sensing no threat, slowly stilled its wings and stepped onto his arm, its fierce eyes locked on his. This quiet mastery did not go unnoticed. A man dressed as a wealthy merchant watched it all, his own gaze as sharp as the falcon's. He saw more than just skill with a bird. He saw an unshakable composure, a natural authority that required no shouting, and a face that blended seamlessly into the background. The merchant, who was in truth a northern lord named Alaric, needed men who could move unseen and hold their tongues. He approached the falconer with a friendly, casual air. He had a small favor to ask, a simple matter of business. Could the falconer, on his travels north, deliver a sealed letter to one of the merchant's associates? It was a test, of course. The message was a decoy, its contents unimportant. What mattered was the delivery. Lord Alaric had his own men watching the entire route. They reported that the falconer asked no questions, showed no curiosity about the sealed parchment, and delivered it directly to the correct man without a single misstep or moment of hesitation. His discretion was absolute. A few days later, the falconer received a summons to a secluded inn, far from the main roads. There, in a private room lit by a single candle, the merchant shed his disguise. Lord Alaric revealed his true title and his real purpose. He was building a web of eyes and ears across the north, a network to protect his lands from rival powers and internal betrayal. He had seen the falconer's unique value. Your freedom of movement is your greatest asset, the Lord explained. You go where soldiers cannot. You hear what diplomats are never told. I am not asking you to become a different man. I am asking you to use the man you already are for a far greater purpose. The falconer's world, once defined by the flight of a bird, had just expanded into the shadows of a silent war. His new duties began not in a secret chamber, but in the same open fields he had known his entire life. Every aspect of his daily work was now layered with a second, hidden purpose. A long flight to exercise a gyrfalcon became a meticulous survey of a borderland. While the bird soared on the high currents, his eyes were fixed on the earth below, counting the number of tents in a distant encampment or noting the fresh ruts left by supply wagons on a little-used road. The birds needed to be fed at precise times, and these routines placed him in perfect positions to observe. A dawn feeding on the castle battlements was not just for the hawk's hunger, it was his chance to memorize the changing of the guard, to learn the sentries' patterns and identify the lazy ones, the ones who might be susceptible to a bribe or a clever distraction. He practiced stealth not as a separate skill, but as an extension of the hunt. Tracking a rabbit through a thicket for his bird to strike taught him how to move without snapping a single twig, how to use the natural cover of the land, and how to remain perfectly still for hours, his breathing slow and shallow until his target moved into view. The forest itself became his training ground for surveillance, teaching him to observe without being observed. Even his communication with the birds was repurposed. The series of whistles he used to call a peregrine back to the glove were subtly altered. A two-note call might mean all is clear, while a trill could signal danger. He learned to read the skies as if they were a living parchment. If a flock of crows suddenly scattered from a distant wood, it could mean riders were approaching. The frantic, circling flight of smaller birds might indicate that someone was hiding in the undergrowth below. These were the unspoken codes of the wild, and he became fluent in them. To anyone watching, he was simply a man utterly devoted to his craft, his actions a mirror of every other falconer. But beneath that ordinary surface, a master spy was being forged. Espionage was not something he did, it was woven into the very fabric of who he was. The line between his cover and his mission did not just blur, it vanished completely. He was living a double life so seamless that even he sometimes wondered where the falconer ended and the spy began. The sky itself became his courier network. While other spies relied on messengers who could be ambushed on forest roads, his agents flew high above the treetops, swift and silent. The most ingenious method involved a tiny, lightweight capsule fastened securely to a falcon's leg. Inside this cylinder, no larger than a grain of wheat, a tightly rolled scroll of the thinnest parchment could carry a world of secrets, a coded list of names, the location of a hidden troop deployment, a single word confirming a betrayal, all traveled safely in this miniature vessel. To any observer, the capsule was just another piece of a falconer's equipment, utterly unremarkable. But for our spy, it was a secure channel for the most sensitive intelligence, carried by a messenger that viewed enemy archers as nothing more than specks on the ground. He trained his birds with a patience that bordered on reverence, conditioning them to respond to a unique set of whistle commands. One particular falcon, a swift peregrine, was taught that a sharp, two-tone whistle meant fly east to a specific ledge on a remote cliff face where another agent waited. There, the bird would land, allowing its cargo to be retrieved and a new message to be loaded for the return journey. This was not magic, it was meticulous behavioral training, turning the bird's natural homing instinct into a targeted delivery system. These feathered couriers could cross hostile territory in a fraction of the time it took a man on horseback, their speed and altitude making them nearly impossible to track or intercept. A message that might take a human courier 3 days to deliver, navigating checkpoints and dangerous terrain, could be in the hands of a northern lord by nightfall when entrusted to the wings of a falcon. To manage the flood of information, our spy developed a sophisticated avian hierarchy. He did not simply use any bird for any message. Each falcon in his muse represented a different priority and a different kind of intelligence. The peregrine, fierce and blindingly fast, was reserved for the most urgent military alerts, an airborne alarm bell for imminent attacks or sudden betrayals. A slower, more steady Seeker falcon might be tasked with carrying longer, more complex diplomatic updates or economic reports, its flight signaling a matter of strategy, not instant crisis. A merlin, small and inconspicuous, could be used for local communications between agents within the same city. This system allowed him to run multiple, simultaneous streams of intelligence. The very sight of a specific bird returning to its loft told his handlers the nature of the news before the capsule was even opened. This reliability and breathtaking speed gave him an overwhelming advantage. Rival spy networks dependent on human runners or riders were shackled to the speed of a horse and the vulnerability of a man. Their messengers could be bought, captured, or simply vanish on a dark road. Our spies' messengers were loyal only to the whistle and the lure, their fidelity unquestionable. They flew in straight lines over mountains and rivers that forced men into long detours. They operated in all weather under the cover of darkness or the glare of noon, while his competitors were still waiting for confirmation of a week-old rumor. He was often acting on intelligence that was only hours old. In the shadow war for the North, information was the ultimate currency, and his falcons gave him the fastest, most secure mint in the land. His true strength lay not in the birds he commanded, but in the invisible threads he spun between the common folk. In every village and at every crossroads he sought out those who, like him, were part of the scenery. A shepherd watching his flock on a high hill had a view of the entire valley. An innkeeper pouring ale in a dusty tavern heard the loose talk of soldiers and merchants. A traveling minstrel, welcomed in every hall, could mark the tensions between a lord and his vassals. These people were the eyes and ears of the land, and the falconer knew their value. He approached them not as a spymaster, but as a fellow traveler. He would share a meal with a shepherd, admiring his dogs, and in return for a story, he might offer a warning about wolves seen to the east, a subtle test of the man's honesty and observation. For an innkeeper, a small favor like holding a private message for a friend could reveal his discretion. The falconer was always listening, always watching for that flicker of resentment against a cruel local lord, or that glint of loyalty to a greater cause. He was not recruiting soldiers, he was cultivating allies. Each person he brought into his web was chosen for their position and their character, woven in slowly and with great care. A minstrel might be given a new verse to sing, a lyric that contained a coded question for a sympathetic nobleman in the audience. A shepherd on a borderland might be taught a simple signal, like leaving a specific stone cairn on a hilltop if he spotted enemy scouts. This was the genius of his network. It had no central heart, no single leader whose capture would destroy it all. If one strand was cut, if a messenger was caught or an innkeeper turned, the rest of the web remained intact. Information flowed like water through this decentralized system, from the shepherd on the hill to the minstrel in the great hall, and finally to the falconer who could piece it all together. He gained something no lone nobleman in a castle could ever possess, a true sense of the realm's pulse. He knew when a bad harvest was stirring discontent in a region long before any official report reached the capital. He heard the rumors of new taxes that would turn the merchants against their lord. he learned of troop movements not from a royal decree, but from the gossip of the soldiers themselves in a tavern. This grassroots intelligence gave him a panoramic view of the North, a living map of loyalties, fears, and ambitions. While his rivals spied on courts and councils, he was listening to the whispers of the land itself, building a power base so diffuse and deeply rooted that it was practically unbreakable. He could shed his identity as easily as a falcon molted its feathers. One week he was a stooped, ragged beggar huddled by the city gates, his face smudged with dirt and his fine leather gloves hidden away. In this role, his falcon was not a prized possession but a scrawny, hooded bird of little value, a companion for a lonely soul. Guards paid him no mind, their conversations about patrol schedules and supply shortages flowing freely over his head. The next week, he would be a refined bird keeper in a royal court, his posture erect, his speech peppered with the polite formalities of the nobility. Here, his gerfalcon was a glittering accessory, a symbol of his assumed patron's wealth that opened every door. He studied not just the words of a local dialect, but the very music of it, the way a farmer from the southern valleys dragged his vowels, or how a northern merchant clipped his sentences short. He practiced their walk, adopting the rolling gait of a sailor in a port town or the measured stride of a monk in a monastery. This was more than a costume, it was a complete immersion. He became the person he pretended to be, thinking their thoughts and feeling their frustrations, so that no false note would betray him. The falcons were the constant in this ever-changing performance, the perfect prop that explained his presence anywhere. A man with a bird on his arm was a common sight, whether in a dusty market or a manicured palace garden. While appearing completely absorbed in tending to his avian charges, he was in fact absorbing everything else. He would stand for an hour, seemingly focused on calming a restless hawk, while his ears captured every word of a strategic discussion between two generals on a nearby balcony. He could spend an afternoon exercising a bird along a fortress wall, his eyes secretly mapping every weakness in the stonework, counting every arrow slit, and noting the blind spots in the guards' patrols. His mastery of disguise was his ultimate camouflage, allowing him to operate in plain sight, a ghost who listened to the secrets of the world while the world saw only a man and his bird. The great hall was a theater of power, its air thick with the scent of roasted boar and murmured ambition. On the Lord's gloved fist, a peregrine falcon stood poised, a living jewel of speed and grace. All eyes were on the bird, a perfect distraction. The falconer's own gaze was downcast, his hands gently adjusting the leather jesses, the picture of a humble servant. But his ears were tuned to the room's quietest frequencies. From a shadowed alcove, two barons whispered of a planned embargo against a rival port city, their voices low but clear over the crackling fire. He heard every word, committing the names and dates to a memory that was far more secure than any parchment. This was his true stage, the very heart of his enemy's confidence. His invitations to these grand estates were frequent, often to train a new bird for the autumn hunts. On these excursions, he was not just a trainer but a ghost among the nobility. Riding alongside lords and their captains, he listened as the thrill of the chase and the flow of wine loosened their tongues. A boastful comment about a hidden mountain pass, a casual complaint about the poor condition of a distant fortress, these were the golden nuggets of intelligence he collected. He learned to use his own craft to encourage these revelations. A sudden, sharp whistle to call a straying hawk could startle a conversation into a revealing pause, prompting one noble to ask another, "What were you saying about the southern garrison?" He would position himself near an open window during a council meeting, ostensibly to give his bird some air, while the heated debate from inside washed over him. He understood that the most valuable secrets were not always shouted in war rooms, but often shared in moments of assumed privacy, in a quiet garden or a secluded corridor. The noble saw a man defined entirely by his skill with birds, a harmless expert whose presence was as natural as a piece of furniture. They never realized that the most dangerous predator in the room was not the falcon on the glove, but the quiet man who held it, a silent scribe recording their every unguarded word. This unfiltered access to the elite gave him an advantage no ordinary spy could ever match, providing a stream of intelligence that was not only timely, but pulled directly from the source, pure and uncensored. His code was a language written in feathers and flight, while other spies used complex ciphers that could be broken with enough time and ingenuity. He built his entire communication system on the foundation of his public life. His codebook was not a hidden document, but the everyday reality of his work. A simple phrase like "the Falcon is molting," written in an innocent-looking note, would signal to his contacts that a key enemy leader had been replaced. The Merlin's migration path shifts east told them that enemy troops were on the move toward the eastern border. This was a cipher rooted in the natural world, making it virtually unbreakable to anyone outside the Brotherhood of Falconers. Even if a rival agent intercepted one of his messages, it would read like mundane shop talk, the boring diary of a man obsessed with his birds. There was no mathematical pattern to unravel, no frequency analysis to perform. The code lived in the shared, secret knowledge of his network. The system extended to the birds themselves and the sounds that guided them. He developed a library of whistle commands, each sequence a key to a different lock of information. A short, sharp tweet followed by a long, falling note might mean the bridge is heavily guarded. A rapid series of 3 identical whistles could signal the coast is clear for a meeting. This was real-time, deniable communication. He could stand in a crowded courtyard, seemingly focused on calling his bird back from a practice flight, and in doing so, transmit a vital piece of intelligence to another agent watching from a window. There was no written evidence to capture, no incriminating document to find. The message was born on his lips and died on the wind the moment it was delivered. This Avian-inspired cryptography made his network not just efficient, but nearly invulnerable. His enemies were searching for spies in dark cloaks, but the true secret messages were passing right over their heads, carried on the wings of hawks and the simple, unchallenged notes of a falconer's call. A rival lord's most trusted messenger was the first to break. The man had a face like weathered stone, but the falconer noticed the subtle tells. He saw how the messenger's eyes lingered a little too long on the coin purse of a wealthier man, and how a flicker of resentment crossed his face when his own lord dismissed a suggestion. This was not just observation, it was diagnosis. The falconer understood ambition and discontent in a man the same way he understood hunger or fear in a bird of prey. It was a force to be guided, not confronted. He began with the shared language of their crafts. He would admire the messenger's horse, noting its stamina and speed, and then gently steer the conversation toward the burdens of constant travel, the lack of proper recognition, the feeling of being used without being truly valued. He never made the first offer. He simply listened, his calm and non-judgmental presence a quiet invitation for confession. He became a mirror, reflecting the man's own frustrations back at him until the messenger himself voiced the thought, the idea that perhaps his skills were being wasted on a thankless master. Only then would the falconer offer an alternative path, a way to turn that resentment into power and reward, all while serving what he framed as a more worthy cause. His approach was a masterclass in patience and psychology. He never recruited through threat or blackmail. That created a brittle, dangerous asset prone to breaking or counter-betrayal. Instead, he turned agents by offering them something they genuinely craved: respect, security, or a chance to settle a secret grudge. He made them feel like they were making a choice, not following an order. A disgruntled castle guardsman, angry over passed-over promotions, might find a sympathetic ear in the Falconer. Over weeks of casual chats during the man's watch, the Falconer would learn everything about the garrison's routines, the guards' morale, and which soldiers could be swayed. He then flipped the guard not with a bag of gold, but with the promise of a position of authority under a new lord who would appreciate his loyalty. Once turned, these double agents became his most devastating weapons. He did not just use them for information, he used them for sabotage. A word planted in the right ear could send a company of elite soldiers on a fool's errand into a swamp, chasing a phantom enemy. A carefully crafted piece of misinformation delivered by a trusted source could convince a rival that his own ally was plotting against him, shattering a crucial alliance from the inside. The Falconer turned the very human weaknesses of ambition and pride into a poison, and he administered it with the gentle hands of a friend. His network was not just a web of informants, it was a hive of turned agents working inside enemy structures, each one a crack in the foundation of his rival's power. He understood that the strongest fortress could be toppled not by smashing its gates, but by convincing the guards to open them from within. The Falconer's journeys wove a hidden map across the north. His official travel logs showed a simple circuit between the grand estates where his birds were kept, but his true route was a secret lattice of back roads, forest trails, and river fords. Each remote falconry muse was more than a shelter for his birds. It was a clandestine fortress, a stone hut perched on a windswept cliff, seemingly built only for molting hawks, became a perfect observation post overlooking a strategic sea lane. A noble's isolated hunting lodge, visited to exercise the lord's prized peregrines, doubled as a secure way station where a weary agent could rest for a night, or a bundle of intercepted documents could be hidden beneath a loose floorboard in the aviary. His legitimate need to traverse the countryside gave him the perfect, unquestioned reason to be anywhere. A journey to tend to a sick gyrfalcon at a border castle allowed him to spend 3 days noting the fortification's crumbling western wall and the lazy routines of its guards. A trip to collect new hawks from a coastal eyrie let him linger for a week, discreetly counting the number and type of merchant ships in the harbor, their cargoes hinting at the economic health of a rival lord. He moved with the quiet authority of a master craftsman, his presence raising no alarms. He developed a relay system of these safe houses, each a day's hard ride from the next. A messenger fleeing pursuit could swap his lathered horse for a fresh one stabled at a mews, and then disappear into the hills with a new set of travel papers provided by the Falconer. Messages changed hands not in dark alleys, but in the open air, passed from one agent to another under the guise of exchanging birds for training. A scout would arrive with a scruffy, common kestrel on his arm, and leave minutes later with a noble, sleek Saker falcon, the tiny message capsule now transferred from one bird to the other in a seamless, invisible transaction. These routes became the lifeblood of his intelligence network, a system of secure arteries that pumped information and personnel safely across the realm. While enemy lords guarded the main roads and bridges, his network thrived in the empty spaces between them, moving through the wild heart of the land, as silent and untraceable as a shadow at noon. The forest path was supposed to be empty. He had checked the route himself just hours before, a quiet track used only by woodcutters and his own network of messengers. But now the crisp sound of marching boots and the jingle of harnesses echoed from ahead. An unscheduled royal patrol was moving directly toward him, and in his satchel was a detailed map of coastal defenses meant for his northern lord. There was no time to hide it, no way to turn back without looking guilty. his mind trained to think like both hunter and prey, assess the threat in a single, cold instant. He could not run and he could not be caught. His only weapon was the peregrine falcon hooded on his arm. With a fluid, practiced motion, he unclipped the jesses and cast the bird into the air. It circled once, a dark speck against the canopy, and he gave a sharp, specific whistle, a command he had painstakingly trained for but hoped never to use. The peregrine folded its wings and dove, not at a game bird but at the lead guard's own horse. It was a blinding, terrifying strike, a flurry of talons and beating wings aimed at the animal's head. The horse reared in a blind panic, screaming and lashing out with its hooves. In the ensuing chaos of shouting men, tangled reins, and the frantic horse, the falconer did not run. He simply melted sideways into the thick undergrowth, his dark cloak blending with the shadows. He became just another part of the forest, moving with a silent, deliberate speed that left no trace. By the time the guards had subdued the terrified horse, the mysterious falconer and his incriminating satchel were gone, vanished as if they had never been there at all. The patrol assumed it was a freak accident, a wild bird spooking their mount. They never connected the chaos to the lone traveler they had briefly seen on the path. That day, a potential disaster was transformed into a powerful reinforcement of his cover story. He was just an unfortunate falconer whose bird had been startled by the soldiers and flown off. The incident taught him a brutal lesson in the fragility of even the best-laid plans. From that moment on, he never carried anything that could not be destroyed or discarded in an instant. Messages were memorized, not written. Maps were redrawn in his head after a single viewing. He developed multiple exit strategies for every location, mapping not just the main gate of a castle, but the drainage culvert, the forgotten servant's passage, and the climbable section of the outer wall. His calm in these moments of extreme pressure was not an absence of fear, but a mastery of it. He learned to use a crisis to his advantage, to lean into his cover so completely that a close call only made his legend as a simple bird trainer more convincing. A pursuer expects a spy to act like a spy, to run, to hide, to fight. They never expect him to stop, to turn, and to ask if they have seen his lost falcon. A routine delivery of a message capsule should have been a simple affair, a quiet exchange in a secluded clearing. But the agent, a man named Cale who had been with the network for years, was different. His hands, usually steady as he transferred the tiny cylinder, fumbled with the leather strap. His eyes, which once held a calm understanding of the risks, now darted nervously toward the tree line. He asked a question that was itself a breach of protocol, a seemingly innocent inquiry about a new whistle command for the Merlins. It was a question no seasoned agent would ever voice aloud, a probe for information he had no need to possess. The falconer felt a cold dread settle in his stomach. This was not simple nerves. This was the subtle shift in a bird's posture before it bolts, the almost imperceptible tension that signals a trap. Cale, a man he had broken bread with, a man he had trusted with his life, had turned. The entire web, every shepherd, every innkeeper, every turned guard was now in mortal danger. A direct confrontation was impossible. Cale would deny it, and the resulting suspicion would tear the network apart from the inside. The falconer needed a solution that was both surgical and deniable, one that would remove the threat without his own hand ever being seen. He crafted a new message, a piece of brilliant, poisonous fiction. It contained details of a fictional northern troop movement, information so valuable and specific that Cale's new handlers would be unable to resist acting on it. The falconer delivered this false intelligence to Cale personally, his demeanor unchanged, his trust seemingly absolute. He then made certain that the real northern commanders were prepared, their forces positioned not to ambush the expected enemy, but to observe the enemy's reaction to the fabricated report. When the rival lord's soldiers moved exactly as the false message had predicted, they walked into a non-existent trap, their plans foiled without a single arrow being loosed. To the rival spymaster, the conclusion was inescapable. Kale had not been a true turncoat, but a loyal northern agent all along, feeding them a masterful piece of disinformation. The traitor had become a liability, a deliberate plant meant to mislead. The rival network, fearing further contamination, dealt with the problem in the way all spy networks do with unreliable assets. Kale simply vanished. The Falconer felt no triumph, only the grim satisfaction of a necessary surgery. He had protected his people, but he had also orchestrated the death of a man he once called a friend. In the silent war for the North, loyalty was the ultimate currency, and betrayal was a debt that always came due. His innovations made everyday falconry tools into masterpieces of deception. The leather hoods used to calm his birds were not just simple covers. He commissioned a special design from a trusted leather worker, a hood with a hidden, silk-lined compartment stitched seamlessly between the outer leather and the inner lining. Into this tiny space he could slip a microscript, a sliver of parchment so thin it was almost translucent, inscribed with a few vital words in a minute-coded hand. To an inspector, it was just a falcon's hood, a common piece of equipment. Only someone who knew the exact location and the specific, almost invisible seam to unpick could ever find the secret it held. He even turned the bells on his bird's legs into a communication device. Each small, brass bell could be tuned by carefully filing its interior to produce a distinct, specific pitch. He created a library of these sounds. The clear, high ring of one bell might signal a successful delivery, while the duller tone of another could be a warning to abort a meeting. Standing in a town square, he could shake a lure adorned with these bells, and to any passerby, it was just the familiar jingle of a falconer calling his bird. But to an agent leaning out a window above, it was a complete sentence, a stream of actionable intelligence transmitted on the air. Perhaps his most cunning invention involved bird lime, the sticky, tree sap-based substance falconers used to trap smaller birds for training their hawks. He discovered that this same glue made a perfect tamper-evident seal for his message capsules. He would use it to secure the tiny cylinder shut. If anyone tried to open it without knowing the precise method for dissolving the seal with a certain vinegar solution, the bird lime would either tear the delicate parchment inside or leave an obvious sticky residue, a clear sign the message had been compromised. This low-tech solution guaranteed the integrity of his communications with the reliability of a modern security seal. These were not complex machines or magical devices. They were simple, brilliant adaptations of the tools he already owned, making his spycraft both incredibly effective and completely deniable. In a world racing toward greater complexity, his genius lay in understanding that the most secure systems are often the ones hidden in plain sight, woven into the unremarkable fabric of daily life. His methods prove that in the shadowy world of intelligence, a clever mind with simple tools can often outmaneuver an army with all the latest technology. His true mastery of the North was not written on any map, but whispered in its dialects and etched into its customs. To become a ghost in the machine of Northern society, he knew he had to do more than just mimic a few words. He had to absorb the very soul of the region. This meant disappearing for entire seasons into remote villages, hiring out his services as a falconer to local chieftains and freeholders. He did not present himself as a visiting expert, but as a wandering craftsman seeking honest work, a man willing to learn. He sat by peat fires in smoky longhouses, listening for hours to the rhythmic cadence of the local speech. He learned that in the high valleys, a drawn-out vowel at the end of a sentence was a sign of respect, while in the coastal towns, a clipped, direct reply was the norm. He committed not just the words, but the music of the language to memory, training his ear until the subtle shift in a man's accent could tell him which specific glen he hailed from. This was the key that unlocked a deeper level of trust. When he spoke, he did not sound like an outsider putting on a performance. He sounded like a man who understood their world. He immersed himself in their folklore, learning the old tales of mountain spirits and river gods. These stories were not mere entertainment. They were a living record of the land's history and the people's fears. A legend about a vengeful spirit haunting a particular forest pass might be a coded warning from generations past about an ambush site. A new, popular ballad sung in a tavern, seemingly about a tragic love affair, could be layered with metaphors criticizing a greedy tax collector or a foolish lord. He learned to raise a toast with the same local brew, reciting the traditional blessings that spoke of good harvests and strong sons. But he also listened for the toasts that were not given, the glasses left conspicuously undrained when a certain nobleman's name was mentioned, a silent protest that spoke volumes about shifting loyalties. This deep cultural immersion transformed him from a spy into a native, a shepherd on a lonely hillside who would have clammed up at the approach of a well-dressed stranger, would instead share a waterskin and an afternoon's gossip with the falconer who knew the old name for the northern wind. He learned to read the landscape of human expression as clearly as he read the flight of a bird. A sudden, superstitious fear of traveling a certain road after dark, which an outsider would dismiss as peasant nonsense, was to him a critical data point, suggesting recent troop movements or bandit activity in that area. These regional idiosyncrasies, these unspoken codes of conduct and belief, became his most valuable intelligence assets. He was not just collecting facts, he was interpreting the mood of the North itself, reporting back to his patrons not only on what people were doing, but on what they were feeling and what they were likely to do next. In the silent war for control, understanding a people's stories often proved more powerful than knowing the number of their soldiers. The summit was a powder keg of old grudges and fragile pride, cloaked in the pageantry of a grand hunt. 3 northern lords, each a power in his own right, had gathered at a remote border castle under the pretense of sport. Their true purpose was a secret pact, an alliance that could secure the entire region against a southern king's encroaching armies. But ancient rivalries simmered just beneath the surface, and a single misplaced word could shatter the entire negotiation. Into this delicate situation came the falconer, invited as a neutral expert to provide hunting birds and lend an air of authenticity to the gathering. His reputation was his passport, his apparent neutrality a shield. No one questioned his constant, quiet presence as he moved among the lords, adjusting a jest or calming a nervous Goshawk. While the noblemen postured and debated in the great hall, the real work of diplomacy happened in the castle's shadowy corners, and the falconer was its chief architect. His deep knowledge of the regional dialects and customs allowed him to act as an informal interpreter, smoothing over unintended insults and clarifying positions with a quiet word. He arranged clandestine meetings between feuding lords in the secluded falconry mews, a space considered his domain where they could speak freely away from the prying eyes of their own retinues. The terms of the alliance, too sensitive to be written down openly, were encoded within his Avian messaging system, a phrase about a peregrine's hunting range, whispered during a flight demonstration, might confirm the number of soldiers a lord was pledging. A discussion about a gyrfalcon's molting season could signal agreement on a timeline for mobilization. His most powerful tool, however, was symbolism. He understood that these proud men needed gestures, not just words. he suggested that each lord present a small, personal token, a signet ring, a dagger, a carved stone to be carried by his falcons between the castle towers where each delegation was housed. The flight of the bird, a swift and beautiful arc across the open sky, became a physical representation of their fledgling trust. To see your rival's token delivered safely by the falconer's steady hand was to see a promise honored. It transformed abstract terms into a tangible act, building a fragile bridge of goodwill where suspicion had once festered. The falconer's calm authority and absolute discretion were the glue that held the entire delicate operation together. He was not merely a messenger, he was a facilitator, a guarantor of the process itself. When the pact was finally sealed, the Northern Alliance was born not only from mutual need, but from the trust he had meticulously cultivated. In that moment, his role transformed irrevocably. He was no longer just a master of spies. He had become a key political operator, a man whose influence now shaped the fate of kingdoms from the council chamber as much as from the shadows. His wealth was a kind that never clinked in a purse or glittered in a strongbox. The falconer accepted his rewards not in sacks of gold, but in the quiet currency of influence and land. A grateful lord, saved from a rival's plot, might grant him a remote hunting lodge nestled in a secluded valley. On the surface, this was a generous gift for a loyal servant. In reality, it was a new node in his intelligence network, a perfect safe house far from prying eyes, with ample space to breed and train his next generation of messenger falcons. Another patron, indebted for a crucial piece of diplomatic intelligence, might bestow a tract of forested land. This was not just property, it was a private training ground and a source of game to feed his birds, making his entire operation more self-sufficient and secure. Each reward was a tool that further expanded his reach, turning gratitude into tangible power. His influence became a subtle force that shaped the North from behind the curtain. He never sought a title or a seat on a council, for those positions came with scrutiny. Instead, he mastered the art of the quiet suggestion. He would mention to a powerful earl that a certain young captain had shown remarkable loyalty and discretion, a man perfectly suited to govern a key border fortress. The earl, believing the idea was his own, would make the appointment, placing a man loyal to the falconer's network in a position of great strategic importance. He could sway economic policy by casually revealing to a treasurer which trade guilds were secretly loyal to a rival lord, guiding the flow of tariffs and favors to weaken his enemies and strengthen his allies. His most profound power lay in the weaving of personal alliances. He became a matchmaker for the powerful, using his unparalleled knowledge of the region's families to arrange strategic marriages. He would gently guide a baron toward a union with the daughter of a coastal shipping magnate, thereby securing not just an alliance, but a fleet of friendly eyes and ears in every port. He facilitated a marriage between the heir of a western mining clan and a northern lord's niece, binding a critical source of iron and silver to his cause. These were not marriages of love, but of geography and logistics, stitching the North together under a web of shared interest that he himself had spun. While kings and dukes sat on their thrones and took public credit for peace and prosperity, the true architect of that stability was the man with the falcon on his arm, a spymaster who proved that the most enduring power is not seized by force, but cultivated in the unseen spaces between official commands. Whispers of his deeds began to ripple outward, but they did not speak of a spy. They told of a phantom of the high moors, a man who walked without a shadow and understood the secret language of the wind. These were not accidental tales. They were a carefully cultivated crop, sown by the falconer and his agents to shield the stark reality of his work with the shimmering veil of myth. A minstrel in a tavern might sing a new ballad of the Grey Falconer, a figure who could turn into a bird at will to escape his enemies, a shepherd paid with a silver coin and a compelling story, would swear to his friends that he had seen the man simply dissolve into the morning mist. These legends served a brilliant practical purpose. For any rival lord or suspicious captain who began to notice a pattern, who started to connect the Falconer's presence with a series of unfortunate leaks and failed ambushes, the rumors provided a ready-made and far more appealing explanation. It was not meticulous tradecraft. They would think it was magic. How else could one man be in so many places, know so many secrets? This supernatural reputation was a potent psychological defense. It discouraged rational investigation and bred a superstitious fear among his enemies, who would want to hunt a man who was said to be protected by forest spirits and served by hawks that could see into a man's soul. More importantly, the legends acted as a beacon. For the common folk living hard lives in a harsh world, the stories of the Grey Falconer were not frightening, they were inspiring. He became a folk hero, a champion of the overlooked, a symbol of cunning triumphing over brute force. This mythical status made recruitment effortless. A young, ambitious stable hand, enthralled by the tales, would see the real Falconer not as a spymaster, but as a legend made flesh. His loyalty was given not to a network, but to a story he desperately wanted to be part of. The Falconer understood that the truth is often fragile, but a good story is indestructible. By wrapping his operations in mythology, he turned his greatest vulnerability, being noticed, into his most powerful asset. He became untouchable, not because he was invisible, but because when people looked at him, they no longer saw a man. They saw a myth, and you cannot arrest a myth. The web began to fray at its edges, not with a shout, but with a whisper. A shepherd's signal stone was found out of place by a rival scout. A minor agent, captured with a coded message, broke under pressure he never should have faced. The Falconer had built a system designed to withstand the loss of any single strand, but now multiple threads were snapping at once. Someone was connecting the dots, and the pattern they were tracing led directly back to him. He realized this was not simple bad luck. It was a coordinated assault, a systematic effort to unravel his entire life's work. The only way to save the network was to cut himself out of it completely. His disappearance had to be absolute, a final performance so convincing it would close the curtain for good. He chose a remote, rocky gorge known for its treacherous winds, a place where even experienced hunters met misfortune. With the care of a man staging his own funeral, he arranged the scene. His favorite leather glove was torn and left on a jagged outcrop. A prized falcon's bell, dented and scratched, was discovered half buried in the scree at the bottom of the ravine. His traveling pack, slashed open and empty, was found snagged on a thorn bush near a fast-moving stream. He even used a small amount of animal blood to stain the rocks, creating the grim suggestion of a fatal fall. To any investigator, the story was tragically clear. The master falconer, pursuing a stray bird, had lost his footing on the unstable cliff edge and plunged to his death, his body likely swept away by the relentless current. He left behind his birds, his gear, every tool of his trade, sacrificing the artifacts of his old life to protect the living, breathing people who still depended on him. The news spread slowly, then all at once. The Grey Falconer was gone. For his enemies, it was a cause for cautious celebration, but the celebration was always tinged with doubt. The legends they had once scorned now haunted them. A man who could turn into a hawk would not die in a simple fall. A phantom of the mist could not be drowned in a mountain stream. His perfectly staged exit created a weapon more powerful than his continued presence, the weapon of perpetual uncertainty. For years, even decades after, rival lords hesitated before moving against his old allies. What if it was a trick? What if the Falconer was merely waiting in the shadows, allowing them to overextend themselves before he struck? His greatest act of espionage was not a message sent, but a question left forever unanswered, a ghost story that continued to guard the North long after the man himself had walked away. His silent war left a lasting peace etched into the very map of the North. The alliances he brokered in those secluded castles did not crumble with the passing of the lords who signed them. They became the bedrock of a new political reality, a durable peace among former rivals that held fast for generations. Without the constant, draining skirmishes over borders and trade rights, the region entered an unprecedented era of stability. Farmers could plant their crops without fear of them being trampled by rival armies. Merchants established reliable trade routes that stretched across the once divided territories, their wagons carrying goods instead of soldiers. This economic boom, this simple ability to plan for a future beyond the next harvest, was the unspoken legacy of his espionage. The wealth generated built new towns, funded libraries, and fortified a collective identity that made the North a formidable, unified power. Future rulers inheriting this stable kingdom rarely knew the name of the man who had made it possible. They simply reaped the rewards of a peace they assumed was inevitable. His influence seeped into the very craft of intelligence itself, the decentralized network of common folk, the use of non-human couriers, the deep cover agents operating in plain sight. These were not his inventions, but he perfected them. His methods became the unspoken textbook for northern spymasters who followed. They studied the scattered reports of his successes, recognizing the genius in turning a society's everyday rhythms into a weapon of information. The Avian messaging system, while eventually replaced by more advanced technology, established a core principle that would endure for centuries: the value of speed and deniability in communication. The secure borders of the northern realms, the very shape of the kingdoms we see on historical maps, were often decided not on a bloody battlefield, but in the quiet moments when his falcons landed with their tiny, vital cargo. A single report on a poorly defended mountain pass could lead to its fortification, permanently shifting a territorial line. A whispered warning about a coastal invasion fleet could allow for a preemptive naval blockade, securing a coastline for 100 years. His life stands as a powerful testament to a hidden truth of history. Grand shifts in power are not always the work of kings and conquerors. Sometimes, the most profound changes are set in motion by a single, quiet individual operating in the shadows, a man whose name history forgot, but whose work shaped the world for generations to come. The principles that guided the Falconer's hand 800 years ago still shape the silent wars fought in our modern world. Replace the swift peregrine with a silent drone, and you see the same strategy at play. Both are non-human agents soaring high above human conflict, their true purpose hidden behind a veil of ordinary function. The Falconer's need for deep cultural immersion, to learn the dialects and stories of the North, is a direct parallel to the CIA case officer who must spend years embedded in a foreign country, not just learning the language but absorbing the local customs and unspoken social rules to build genuine trust. His greatest innovation, the decentralized web of shepherds and innkeepers, is the historical blueprint for the cell-based structures used by intelligence agencies and special forces today. By ensuring no single agent knows the entire network, they create a system that can survive the capture or compromise of any individual part, just as the Falconer's web remained intact even when one of his own turned against him. The most enduring tool, however, may be the simplest. His identity as a humble bird trainer was the ultimate cover, a lesson modern spies still learn. Today, an intelligence officer might operate under the guise of a diplomat, a business consultant, or an aid worker. their true mission protected by the unquestioned reality of their day-to-day life. This is the unchanging heart of espionage. The technology has transformed from messenger falcons to encrypted satellites, from bird-lime seals to digital steganography. Yet the core tenets remain steadfast, the silent virtues of patience, perception, and the subtle art of becoming part of the scenery. It is a reminder that in the shadowy contest for information, the most sophisticated system is often no match for a human mind trained in the ancient arts of observation and trust. His journey from the open moors to the shadowy corridors of power offers a masterclass in adaptability. He never discarded his identity as a falconer, he simply repurposed it. Every skill he had spent a lifetime honing, from reading the wind to calming a nervous bird, was reimagined as a tool for espionage. This was not a career change in the modern sense, but a profound expansion of his existing role. His deep knowledge of avian behavior became the foundation for an unbreakable communication code. His patience in training a young hawk translated directly into the slow, careful work of turning a rival agent. His ability to move unseen through the wild became his method for crossing hostile territory. He did not learn a new trade, he applied his old trade to a new, higher-stakes game. The lesson is clear. True adaptability is not about abandoning your past expertise, but about seeing its hidden potential in a different context. For him, the boundary between falconry and spycraft did not exist because both disciplines relied on the same core principles: observation, patience, and an unbreakable bond of trust. This blending of skills is what gave him his unique and overwhelming advantage. No traditional spy, trained only in deception and combat, could ever hope to imitate his methods because they lacked his lifelong, authentic mastery of the natural world. His story challenges our modern obsession with specialization. We are often told to niche down, to become the best at one specific thing. Yet his life demonstrates that the most powerful innovations occur at the intersections. His genius lay in connecting two seemingly unrelated fields, falconry and intelligence, and in doing so, he created something entirely new. This principle is just as potent today. A software engineer's logical precision can revolutionize project management in a creative field. A teacher's ability to explain complex concepts can make them an exceptional product manager. The key is to look at your own unique set of skills, no matter how ordinary they may seem, and ask a simple but transformative question: what else can this do? His commonness was his camouflage, but his adaptability was his sword. He teaches us that our deepest strengths are often the most portable, waiting only for a new challenge to reveal their hidden power. In a world of constant change, the ability to see new applications for old knowledge is not just an asset. It is a form of alchemy, turning the lead of routine expertise into the gold of groundbreaking innovation. History seldom writes the names of its true architects in stone. The Falconer spy's legacy is a ghost in the archives, a name that flickers at the edge of official chronicles, celebrated in some as a patriot who forged peace, and condemned in others as a shadowy manipulator who twisted the fates of men for his own inscrutable ends. His true motives, the full scale of his achievements, remain a secret known only to the silent Moors and a handful of trusted allies who carried the truth with them to their graves. You can walk through the old northern towns even today and find subtle hints of his enduring influence. A weathered stone falcon perched above a town hall doorway, a small bronze bird guarding an ancient bridge. These are the unmarked memorials to the man who once wove the region together with threads of information. They are public art to most, but to those who know the story, they are quiet acknowledgments of a debt that could never be publicly recorded. In certain old families, there persists a quiet pride, a whispered claim of descent from one of his many agents. It is a heritage not of noble titles but of a different kind of honor, born from having played a part in a story too dangerous to ever be fully told. This divided legacy, part hero and part phantom, serves as a powerful reminder. The grand narrative of history is almost always written by the visible, by the kings and queens who sat on thrones and the generals who led the charges. But the course of human events is so often shaped by the unseen, by the quiet decisions and hidden actions of those who operated from the shadows. His story urges us to look beyond the official records, to read between the lines of old texts, and to listen for the whispers that hint at the complex, human forces that truly drove the world forward. His transformation from a solitary bird trainer into the unseen architect of the North's destiny stands as a timeless lesson in the art of influence. He never wielded a sword to command armies or shouted from a throne to bend nations to his will. Instead, he mastered the quiet power of perception, seeing the hidden potential in his own ordinary life and in the world around him. His journey was a masterclass in adaptability, proving that the most profound power is not seized through force, but cultivated through a deep understanding of one's unique skills and the wisdom to apply them in unexpected arenas. He teaches us that the most effective agents of change are often those who remain invisible until the precise moment their action reshapes the board, their strength lying not in their visibility, but in their profound connection to the subtle currents that truly guide human events. Let his story be a reminder to look for the hidden potential in your own talents, to see the unspoken value in your own unique perspective. History is filled with such forgotten game changers, ordinary people who leverage their uncommon skills to achieve extraordinary ends. If this tale of feathers and intrigue has captured your imagination, consider subscribing for more deep dives into the lives of history's unsung heroes. And we would love to hear from you. Which forgotten figures or secret histories should we explore?